In this module, we're going to talk about game mode. If you went through the Unity tutorial that was recommended earlier in the course, you're gonna be familiar with game mode, and we're going to do our first performance check, which should be done throughout the build. This will be our first one. It's going to kind of give you a baseline, and then the best practices do a performance check, every time throughout the course, just to make sure that if you do something that impacts performance in a really bad way, it's much easier to troubleshoot because you can back up on, hey, what did I just do that impacted performance? So let's go back into our Unity scene. We have just imported our SPXs. We moved them into our scene. We did our set mesh materials, and now we have a section of our course that's starting to look like a golf course. We got some water, we got some tees. Up here at the top, we've got a couple of different tabs. We've got our scene, which is the one thing that we work in the most. And we also have another tab called game. And this is where we can actually launch as if we're launching the Unity editor into what we call game mode, which renders it as if we're playing the game. Now, you have to understand that we're not going to be able to hit a golf ball in here. Really what we're doing is we're activating our camera, and we're going to start rendering our scene, and we're going to get an idea of what that performance looks like. And I'm going to show you guys how to set this up. So the first thing we need to do is underneath here, this tab, you're going to see a bunch of these low resolution aspect ratios. We can use these, but they're not going to give us a good idea of performance. We need to add, really, we're looking for an HD performance ratio. So let's just call this HD. And we're going to do our fixed height and a fixed width of HD, which is 1920 by 1080. So that's what we call 1080p, right? And we're just going to hit OK. And now you see that we should have this check mark down here. And we want to make sure that we're using this resolution, because if not, then we're going to have a hard time baselining this. Because if we use a low resolution, we're going to get a performance boost that's really not applicable to the game, because we want to run an HD in the game. So the next thing we're going to do is let's go back to our scene, and we're going to move to a spot that we want to look at. So let's say this is our first tee box, and I like to go to about where we would be standing, and then just adjust this to be like looking out on the course. Now you can see we have our main camera here. If I highlight that, but our main camera is sitting way over there, and you can see the arrow in this image. So it's, let me just show you. So I can fly out here, and you can see our camera is sitting way out here, and it's pointed in this direction. And I'm looking at the course over here, and you can kind of see that it's showing you what it's visually seeing, right? But that's not where we want our camera. Let's align our camera back over here. Let's go to our tee box, about where we were before, where we would be standing. We highlight our main camera, and we come up here to Game Object, Move the View. Oops, I'm sorry. Game Object, Align with View. And when we do that, the camera has now moved exactly to where I'm looking, and this is essentially the box, the viewfinder for the camera. The next thing we're going to do is we want to come over here to this rotation, and let's change the X to 0 and the Z to 0. We're going to leave Y at whatever it was. The reason being is that when we turn on game mode, we don't want our camera like somewhat sideways, so when we move around, it looks like we're walking on an angle. We want it squared up. So if you're ever using, if we're moving around and things look a little wonky or sideways, we want to make sure that before we started our game mode that our camera rotation was 0 for X and for Z. And now we can come in here and we can hit play, and it will be launched into game mode here, and you can see the camera picks up just where we were looking at. And if I do anything right now with my mouse, nothing happens. But if I hit the M key, M as in Mark, now I move my mouse, I can look around, right? Just like as if I was standing in game. So I'm moving around. If I hit W, I will move in the direction of my mouse, and I can essentially fly around the game now. All right, so now I can look around my course, I can fly around, lots of fun, very entertaining. So WASD, are the keys that you can move to go around your course. Now, let's say that I can hit M key again, and now I'm no longer moving around with my mouse. I can stop this, and you notice when I stop it, I go back to where I was when I started, okay, back at that T box. You have to understand when you start game mode, any changes you make to your scene, okay, to your scene are not preserved. So let me give you a good example of this. And actually, let's do our first performance check, and I'll show you how this works. So I'm going to hit play again. I'm going to launch into game mode, so I can hit mouse and I can move around. And I'm going to hit M again so I stay still. And now you can see over here that I'm getting in my stats screen, I'm getting 200, maybe averaging, this is bouncing around a lot, maybe I'm hitting 240 frames per second, right? Some other information in here, which is good to have, which is the number of triangles in my scene, which is really, right now it's 1.5 million. The number of vertices, the number of batches is important to pay attention to as well. And those three things can impact your performance. And I also see my screen resolution here. So if I come over here to my OPCD meshes that we just imported, and I disable all of those, and then they go away, you can see that I got a performance hit, or an increase. So where I was about 240 before, I'm in the 280s, 290s, occasionally it goes down, I would say that's averaging around 280 now. And if I turn those back on, it goes back down to that 240. So you can see right there, that's a good performance benchmark. I'm seeing that I'm getting approximately a 40 frame per second hit with my meshes. Okay, that's fairly reasonable. So you should understand that with your meshes, that's the frame per second hit you get. What you could also do is if you have concerns about a particular mesh, and I can tell you the one that we should be concerned about, which is our biggest mesh, is hole 99. I can also come down here to that hole 99. I can disable just that one hole, and you can see it disappears. And looks like I'm more like higher in the 250s now. So maybe this is just an estimate, 10 frames per second hit. Now let me just leave this off and let me go out of game mode. Now you can see as soon as I left game mode, that spline was enabled again. So keep in mind that anything you do in game mode is not preserved. So any changes you make to your scene are not preserved. However, if you make changes to your project, keep in mind this is like things in our warehouse. These will be preserved though. Okay, so if something is not in our scene and we make a change to it, for example, things in our project folders, because they are not in our scene, those will be preserved in or out of game mode as you enter in and out. Okay, so that's our first performance check. You should take a mental note or even write down what you're getting frames per second in there, and understand what the impact is. Turn some meshes on and off. Turn all your meshes on and off. Turn your terrain on and off, and just see what the impact is on that frame per second, and get an idea of how that impacts your performance. We're going to be doing that a lot as you're planning vegetation and doing other things on your courses.